Why would a country fear a singer? Not a singer who just entertains, but a singer who makes people feel proud, organized, and unafraid. A singer who can walk into a room of workers, or students, or struggling families, and make them believe they deserve more than what they've been given. A singer whose fame reaches beyond America, into Europe, into Africa's future, into the Caribbean's fight for dignity. Paul Robeson wasn't targeted because he lacked talent. He was targeted because his talent carried a message, and that message traveled faster than any ship, any newspaper, any politician's speech. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to where he was formed, Princeton, New Jersey, where a minister who had escaped slavery raised a son who refused to live quietly. His name was Paul Robeson. Paul Leroy Robeson was born on April 9, 1898, in Princeton, a town that carried two Americas at the same time. One America was academic, wealthy, and confident, the America of a famous university and polished street. The other America was older and harsher, built on segregation, social control, and the long afterlife of slavery. Robeson's own family history held that contradiction. His father, William Drew Robeson, had been born enslaved in North Carolina and escaped as a young man, later educating himself and becoming a Presbyterian minister. His mother, Maria Louisa Bustill, came from a free black family with deep roots in the Northeast and was known as an educated, capable woman. When Paul was still a child, his mother died, and the loss marked him early. In different ways, grief and discipline shaped the household. His father's faith was not soft. It was the kind of faith that tells you life will test you, and you must be stronger than the test. As Paul grew, the family moved to Somerville, New Jersey. He became the kind of student teachers remember for decades, brilliant, focused, and unusually mature. He also became an extraordinary athlete. But in the early 20th century, excellence did not protect black children from humiliation. In many places, it attracted it. America had rules for black ambition. Be gifted, but do not become too big. Be talented, but stay in your lane. Robeson's life would become a long argument against that demand. In 1915, he won a scholarship to Rutgers University. He was one of the very few black students there, and he entered a campus where whiteness was treated as normal and blackness was treated as an intrusion. On the football field, opponents targeted him with brutality. Off the field, he faced isolation and hostility. But he did not break. He trained harder. He studied harder. He endured. And then he excelled so loudly that the institution could not pretend he was invisible. He became a two-time All-American in football, starred in other sports, and earned top academic honors, including membership in Phi Beta Kappa. The point wasn't just that he was gifted. The point was that he was gifted in ways America wanted to keep separate. They could imagine a black athlete. They struggled to accept a black intellectual. Robeson was both at once, and he carried himself with a calm that made people even more uncomfortable because he was not asking to be included. He was proving he belonged. After Rutgers, he went to Columbia Law School in New York City, stepping toward what was supposed to be the safest version of success, an elite degree and a professional career. But the promise cracked quickly. While working at a law office, Robeson experienced a moment that revealed the real boundary line. A white secretary refused to take dictation from him because she would not accept a black man in authority, even if he was an attorney. It was a small act with a huge meaning. In that moment, Robeson understood that credentials did not cancel prejudice. Even if you did everything right, the system could still decide you were out of place. So he made a choice that would define his life. He stepped away from law, the respectable road, and moved toward performance, the public road, the riskier road. It was not an escape from struggle. It was a decision to fight on a bigger stage. Robeson entered American entertainment at a time when black performers were often boxed into stereotype. The stage could pay you, but it could also degrade you. Robeson's presence refused degradation. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dignified, with a voice that sounded like it came from deep earth. When he sang spirituals, the songs born in slavery, he didn't present them as distant history. He sang them as living testimony, as memory that still had a heartbeat. He married Eslanda Essie Good Robeson, a partner who believed in his talent and helped manage and shape his career. Together they built something unusual, not just fame but a platform. In the 1920s and 1930s, Robeson rose through theater and music in the United States and abroad. He played major roles, including in Shakespeare, and he became one of the defining performers of his era. One role followed him everywhere, Joe in Showboat, singing Ol' Man River. In many productions, the song was performed as a sigh, like exhaustion was the final truth. Robeson would not leave it there. Over time, he reshaped the way he performed it, changing phrasing and sometimes lyrics so that the song carried resistance instead of surrender. Even without explaining politics, he was changing the emotional message. We are not meant to accept suffering as our natural condition. And then there was Othello. Robeson's Othello mattered not only because he was a black actor in a famous Shakespearean role, but because he played the character with depth, intelligence, and full humanity. It challenged audiences who were used to seeing black characters reduced to symbols. Robeson insisted on being a person on stage, not a stereotype. Later, in the 1940s, he starred in a Broadway production of Othello that became historic, running longer than any Shakespeare production had on Broadway up to that time. By then, his fame was unquestionable. But for Robeson, fame was never the finish line. It was leverage. Robeson spent significant time in Britain and traveled widely through Europe. He learned languages, not as a party trick, but as a way to show respect and build connection. He sang in numerous languages and studied global folk traditions, convinced that the songs of ordinary people carried history, pain, and pride. The more he traveled, the more he saw patterns that felt familiar. He met working-class communities, especially in Wales, where miners and their families lived with the daily reality of dangerous labor and economic exploitation. Robeson did not treat them like a charity case. He treated them like kin. He performed for them, supported their causes, and spoke about solidarity as something real. In the miners' struggle, he recognized the same structure that harmed black communities in America: profit at the top, hardship at the bottom, and propaganda to keep people divided. He also became openly anti-fascist as Europe moved toward catastrophe. During the Spanish Civil War, Robeson traveled to support the forces fighting Franco's fascism, performing for volunteers and speaking to audiences about what was at stake. To Robeson, fascism wasn't only a European crisis. It was racism, colonialism, and class brutality turned up to its most extreme volume. He believed that if the world allowed fascism to win in one place, it would spread its logic everywhere. World War II ended, but the danger didn't disappear. It changed shape. After the war, the United States and the Soviet Union became rival superpowers. The Cold War wasn't only about borders and weapons. It was also a war of reputation and ideology. And in that war, the United States wanted to present itself as the leader of freedom and democracy. But there was a problem. The world could see America's segregation, lynchings, voter suppression, and racial violence. Black Americans could describe their reality in detail, and their words carried weight overseas. Robeson, famous and international, became especially threatening to that image. He spoke about Jim Crow as a national disgrace. He supported labor rights. He supported anti-colonial movements and African self-determination. He worked with organizations and leaders who argued that African and Caribbean nations deserved independence and dignity, not management by European empires. In a period when many Western institutions still viewed Africa through a colonial lens, Robeson insisted that Africa's future was not a side issue but part of the global story. He connected the fights of Black Americans with the struggles of people in the Caribbean, in Africa, and across the world. In today's language, he was linking civil rights to human rights. Robeson also spoke positively about the Soviet Union, especially after experiencing that he could live and work there without the constant, daily racial humiliations that marked American life. This is where history becomes complicated, and it matters to say so plainly. The Soviet system publicly opposed certain forms of racial hierarchy and used anti-racism as part of its international image, but it also carried deep repression, censorship, and state violence, especially under Stalin. Robeson's public defense of the USSR, and his unwillingness to denounce it in the way American officials demanded, became one of the central reasons he was targeted. Some of his political judgments in that arena remain criticized, and not without reason. But Robeson's core focus was consistent. He was looking for alliances against racism, colonialism, and economic exploitation, and he refused to let U.S. power decide what he was allowed to believe. In the late 1940s, the pressure began to tighten. His concerts faced harassment. Venues were warned. Organizers were threatened. His name was treated like a problem that needed to be managed. Then came 1949, one of the clearest moments when social hostility and political fear collided in public. Robeson was scheduled to perform in Peekskill, New York. The first attempt was disrupted by violent opposition and had to be canceled. A second concert was organized days later. He performed, but as the crowd left, people were attacked. Rocks were thrown. Cars were smashed. Families trying to go home were injured. The lesson was designed to be unmistakable. You can speak, but we can make speaking dangerous, and we can punish not only you, but anyone who stands near you. If you're trying to silence a voice, violence is one method. But the U.S. government had a method that was often even more effective, because it looked legal and quiet. In 1950, the State Department revoked Robeson's passport and refused to renew it. No criminal conviction was required. No jury decision. Just a bureaucratic order that blocked him from international travel. For an artist whose career depended on global stages, it was a chokehold. But the deeper meaning went beyond money. It was containment. The government wasn't only trying to stop Robeson from working, it was trying to stop the world from hearing him, because overseas audiences took him seriously. His voice challenged America's image in the very places where the U.S. was competing for influence. At the same time, blacklisting grew. Blacklisting meant you could be cut off from work because you were accused of having the wrong politics or associations. In the entertainment world, it could end careers overnight. Robeson was surveilled heavily for years, including by the FBI. Promoters feared being associated with him. Record companies hesitated. Even some former allies backed away, not necessarily because they disagreed, but because they were afraid. One of the most brutal parts of political repression is that it tries to isolate you socially, to make you feel like you're shouting into an empty room. Robeson refused the emptiness. During the passport ban, he found ways to keep performing and speaking. He performed in the United States, even when venues were pressured. He sang for union halls, community gatherings, and supporters who were told they should be ashamed to be there. He also turned the border itself into a symbol of resistance, performing near the US-Canada line so that audiences on the Canadian side could hear him. He could not step across, but his voice could. That was the point. A government can control papers. It can't always control sound. In 1956, Robeson was called before the House Un-American Activities Committee, a congressional body famous for interrogating artists, teachers, and activists in the Cold War. These hearings were not simply about fact. They were about forcing obedience in public. People were pressured to renounce beliefs and to name others. Many careers were destroyed through fear alone. Robeson did not give them the performance they wanted. He challenged them. He refused to treat his ideas as criminal. He made clear that he had earned his place in the nation through family sacrifice and personal achievement, and that he would not be lectured about loyalty by people who tolerated racism. His testimony became one of the most famous examples of defiance in that era, not because it was loud, but because it was steady. He was telling the country, in plain terms, that freedom has no meaning if it only applies to those who agree with power. The passport fight continued through the courts and public pressure. By 1958, after years of protest and legal developments around passport authority and civil liberties, Robeson's passport was finally restored. He traveled again and received enormous welcomes in parts of Europe. For many abroad, he wasn't seen as a villain at all. He was seen as a symbol of courage and a symbol of America's hypocrisy. A nation that marketed liberty while punishing an artist for speaking about injustice. But the damage of the silencing campaign was real. Years of surveillance, stress, financial pressure, and isolation took a toll on Robeson's health. In the 1960s, his public life slowed. The world around him was changing fast. African and Caribbean nations were gaining independence. The civil rights movement in the United States was reshaping laws and consciousness. Many of the ideas Robeson had pushed early, connecting racism to global systems, were becoming harder to dismiss. Yet his name remained strangely absent from mainstream celebration in the United States. That absence was not an accident. When a society is embarrassed by how it treated someone, it often tries a second punishment, forgetting. But history doesn't stay buried forever. Paul Robeson's legacy is enormous, and it reaches far beyond music. He showed that an artist can be international without being hollow, that you can learn other people's songs without losing your own, and that global solidarity is not a slogan but a practice. He proved that a Black American voice could belong to the world, and that the diaspora's story cannot be contained inside one nation's borders. He also leaves us a lesson about power. When someone is punished not for violence, not for theft, not for harming the public, but for influencing people with words and songs, that tells you something important. It tells you the rulers of that moment believed the truth was contagious. They believed dignity could spread. They believed unity across race and borders could threaten the systems that kept certain people on top. Robeson died in 1976, but the attempt to silence him failed in the long run. Recordings survive. Memories survive. His story survive. And today, when musicians speak about injustice, when athletes refuse to be only entertainment, when activists connect struggles across oceans, the path they're walking has Robeson's footprints on it. In the Beyond America story, the fight is never only inside one country. It is a fight about how voices move, how ideas move, and who gets to be heard. Paul Robeson understood that if you can make ordinary people feel proud and unafraid, you can change what they are willing to accept. That is why they tried to silence him. And that is why we still need to remember him. This is Before and Beyond America. If you want more cinematic history tracing Africa and the global diaspora through the people who changed the world, subscribe. Because the next story is already waiting, and it's another reminder that borders can stop bodies, but they can't stop legacy.